everyone! Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I wanted to make a video for all of you new cosplayers out there, or for anyone who wants to enter the hobby of cosplaying. In this video, I'm going to go over some of the most basic and useful tools that you will need for all of your cosplay sewing projects. Let's get started, shall we? So the first basic tool that I want to talk about is a basic sewing machine. I have had my sewing machine for over 10 years now. It is a really simple machine. It is the Brother LS2125. I don't think you can find this model on the market anymore because I've had it for so long, but realistically, it is a machine that has worked for me. I have made so many costumes using this machine, and it only has a couple of stitches. When you're looking for a sewing machine and you're on a budget, there are lots of options that you can choose from out there. What you want to look for is you want to make sure that you have a machine that has at least 3 different kinds of straight stitches and a couple of different zigzag stitches. If you can find a machine that has at least a couple of straight stitches and a couple of zigzag stitches, it's probably going to have a buttonhole stitch and maybe even a blind hem stitch, both of which are pretty useful as well. The thing to note about buying a sewing machine if you've never used one before is that you really should look up how to take care of your machine and how to use your machine. I've seen a lot of reviews on different sewing machines about how they tried using their machine for the first time and then it got stuck and jammed. And they figured that it was because of the sewing machine that it got stuck and jammed. But you have to understand that when you buy your machine, you do have to make sure to take care of it beforehand. You need to oil it and clean it out and make sure that everything is in working order. You also have to make sure that you thread it properly, both on the top and on the bobbin side. So when you get your new sewing machine, make sure to look up some tutorials on it. The second basic tool that I want to talk about is the seam ripper. You want to have a good seam ripper that has a nice grip and is not one of those cheap ones that typically comes in like a basic sewing kit. Those ones tend to break easily and they're hard to grip. The seam ripper is going to be one of the most useful tools for you when you start off, because you're going to be ripping out a lot of seams to start off. Trust me, I did. We all did it. It's part of the learning process. Next up are scissors. You're going to want to have a couple of good pairs of sharp scissors. You're probably going to want to have a small pair of snips to cut like tiny little threads. And then you're going to want a larger pair of scissors that are for cutting larger pieces of fabric. If you really want, you can even get some pinking shears. I've never personally used them. I find that they're really hard, at least the one that I have. I find it really hard to like open and close. It just hurts my grip, hurts my hand when I use it. I know that a lot of people like to use pinking shears because it keeps the edges clean. Now the important thing with fabric scissors is that you only ever use them on fabric. Don't ever use them on anything else. Don't cut your hair with them. Don't cut paper with them. Just fabric. Just fabric. So in addition to your fabric scissors, you're probably going to want to have a good pair of cutting scissors for, general paper and things like that. Because if you're going to be starting out to sew, chances are you're probably going to get yourself a couple of patterns and you're going to need to cut the pattern paper at some point. So you can use your regular paper scissors for the pattern paper. Next up, you're going to want to get yourself a good measuring tape. Now, you are going to be using measuring tape a lot when you're trying to figure out what measurements to use for different costumes and for different patterns as well. So make sure you get yourself a good measuring tape. And I'm not talking about the ones used for construction. You want one of those nice flexible fabric ones. Next up is chalk. I find chalk incredibly useful for making marks on my patterns, such as all of the little triangle notches, or even just like the dots to connect the different pattern pieces together and where they should line up. White chalk is pretty good for a lot of fabric that is like darker colored, like this red here. But if you're working with white chalk is hard to work with. So what you might want to do is get yourself an erasable marker or fabric pen. Please avoid using colored chalk. Colored chalk might seem like a good idea because you're like, oh, well, it's gonna wash off, right? Because it's chalk. Well, the chalk washes off, but the dye in the chalk stays. Ask me how I know. I may or may not have used pink chalk on a white dress, and it kind of shows. Then you're going to want to have a good iron. My iron that I bought, I think I bought it for like 30 bucks on Amazon. They're not expensive, but you want to make sure that your iron has settings for both steam and not steam. It has a good range of temperature settings because you're going to be working with a different variety of fabric here and there. Now, you don't need to get yourself an ironing board, really. So if you're really on a budget, you can save on that for the time being. An ironing board is useful, but if you have yourself a table and a towel, you can do a lot of things with just the table and the towel and your iron. Heck, I have used towels for so many things. For ironing sleeves, for ironing armholes, for ironing any kind of curves. I just take the towel and like roll it up and fold it to take the shape of the curve that I'm setting, and I press it on that. The last thing I want to talk about is getting yourself a magnetic pin dish. This is so useful when it comes to just collecting your pins and collecting them if they ever fall off the table and land on the floor, and then you don't know where they all went to. The magnetic pin dish, I often use it to kind of collect the pins that have fallen onto the floor to make sure that I collect all of them and I didn't miss one by accident. Because, let's be honest, stepping on a pin is not on our bucket list. The magnetic pin dish is also really useful for when you're working on something. When I'm sewing, I like to take the pins out and just put them on the dish, and I don't have to worry about sticking them into a pin cushion or anything like that. And I know that when I place it anywhere near the magnet, it's going to catch and hold it there. It's not going to fall off or anything like that. So those are my basic tools that I think every beginning cosplayer who's into sewing should have in their repertoire. Again, if you really are on a budget and you can't afford a $100 or $120 sewing machine, you can get by with hand sewing. But you really should have the other smaller things as well, including the iron. Ironing is so important. When you want to finish your seams and just make everything look clean and nice and pressed, it's so important. Irons are often underrated, and a lot of beginning cosplayers, they tend to forget to iron out their seams and press everything, which then makes their costumes look crinkly and unfinished. If you liked this video, please leave a comment. Press that like button, maybe give me a follow or subscribe. That would be awesome. And I will see you next time. Bye!